Hi, I'd like to do a review on the Big Apple tyre, the Schwalbe Big Apple. You can see on this. This is a brand new one which I've just fitted to this bike, which is my down cadenza folding bike, which is my main sort of exercise fun bike for riding roads and off-road. Basically it's a go anywhere bike, and these tyres allow me to roll very quickly on the road and also perform beautifully, cornering, going in a straight line, and going off-road, gravelling, and I tend to ride dry sort of tracks and the like. I don't tend to go into muddy, although I do, if it's been raining or so forth, or I've been caught in the rain, then I will, but I don't ride during the winter or when it's extremely muddy, mainly because I don't particularly like cleaning the bike, or the time it takes to clean the bike. The tyre that you see there, as I said, is a brand new one. The original tyre it came with is this one here, and this is the front tyre, the original front tyre. It's identical. It's a 559 50, which is a 2-inch 26 wheel, and the tread pattern is identical. There is a kind of lip here, which is one of the sort of points at which it's been released from the mould, which you can see. You can just make it out on this. It's not quite so clear, but the interesting thing about this has done about 3,600 miles, or 5,700 roughly kilometres if you're into kilometres as opposed to miles. The tread depth on this is about 0.8 of a millimetre. The tread depth on this is, at the centre, is about 0.6. So it's worn about 0.2 millimetres in 3,600 miles, which is pretty good going. It's deeper at the centre than it is at the side. Which is, I think it's about 0.65 right down back here on both of those. So the wear that I've had on the front tyre is pretty minimal. I usually run these about 3 bar or 3.5 bar. The harder you have it pumped up, the much more jarred the performance. And as you can see with this particular bike, there's no suspension on it. The suspension itself comes from the tyre. So you would drop it, and being aluminium forks, it does seem to vibrate quite a lot. And where I've gone over particularly rough ground, it can be so bad that it does actually hurt my hands and wrists. So it does mean that I tend to sit back further in the seat, and so I can unweight my hands on the handlebars, and so I'm just pushing the handlebars as opposed to resting on them. But anyway, let's take a look at the back tyre. The back tyre is a little bit more squared off, but still, after 3,600 miles or 5,700 kilometres, it's still in pretty good nick. You can see all the tread, albeit this is a lot shallower now, and I can't remember how deep it is, but it's you can feel that it's slightly squared off, although I don't know if it actually shows in the video because it's quite subtle. Because even though I pump these up to 4.5, between 4 and 4.5 bar, as opposed to 3 and 3.5 bar for the front, which works to, I think it's about 60 psi for the back, and about 40 psi for the front. So anyway, the reason why I've put a new set onto this bike as opposed to leaving the old set on was because I wanted to fit these onto another bike I have, which is a mountain bike which I've recently got. And I found that the tyre that it has is quite slow. So these have inverted tread, and I don't know if I pointed out that the new ones have a stripe that goes around, which is reflective, which means you don't need to put the reflective into your wheel, which I think is a really nice thing. The old ones didn't. The old ones didn't have that reflective strip, and the writing itself isn't reflective either. The sidewalls on this feel quite thin, but having said that, I've ridden probably about 600 miles, roughly 1,000 kilometres off really quite rough road, gravel tracks and also flint tracks. I've never got a puncture on these. I have had a puncture, and let's see if I can find it. No, I can't find it. But it wasn't due to anything that happened to these tyres. It was more due to the way I was filling it with air, and it damaged the filling valve. Right, it sort of caught between the actual rim and the valve, and actually damaged the valve or the inner tube at that point. So it wasn't anything to do with the tyres or any problems with that. It was entirely down to user error, as you would say. So anyway, this is the tyre that these will be replacing. And one of the things that you can say about the tread is there's an awful lot more tread on this that actually meets the ground, especially when you're riding on road, than say for instance on this. One of the things that is true is fresh air offers no grip. So the spaces in between here don't add anything to the performance of the tyre. And because it's a combination of the pressure and the surface contact area, the deformation that you have on this sort of tyre, even though it's kind of wider because of the knobbly bits, mean that it's slower because it's deforming the tyre more than these. So you can get away with these sort of wide tyres. There's about 2-inch wide tyres, and this is about the same really, except the knobbly bits make it look even wider. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't really used this in a sort of mountain bike type way than my other bike. Whilst I have used this particular bike cross country, as I say, I use it as a go anywhere bike, and I've ridden the Ridgeway several times, Barbary Castle, White Horse and so forth, which is relatively rough track, and you wouldn't generally tackle that on a bike which wasn't capable of riding in fairly soft or rough ground, and this performs beautifully. These tyres perform beautifully. I've got no complaints at all on the way these have performed, and there's been times where I've ridden over rocks and the rocks have pinged out from underneath in such a way, and I've sort of, you can feel the bike sort of move as it falls off this kind of stone, and you think that's a guaranteed puncture, and it hasn't. It just hasn't punctured. And if you were, and I have checked, if you were to look closely at these, there's no divots, there's no cuts, there's nothing to indicate that these have been cycled on anything but the nicest of tarmac roads, which quite definitely they haven't been. I've taken them on some really, really rough tarmac roads, and again, because these are not these are much lower pressure than, say, for instance, a road tyre would be, a much smaller road tyre, but they're still fairly high pressured when compared to, say, for instance, a mountain bike tyre. So, and I don't change pressure if I'm going off-road. If I know I'm going off-road for a long time, then I usually will drop these slightly, because it's just more comfortable. And as I said, that the punishment that you have to your wrists is just something else when these are pumped up hard. The rear seems to be okay. The legs seem to absorb a lot of the vibration from the back, but certainly as far as the front is concerned, my wrists, I have had a few times where I've had, my wrists have got so bad that I've had to have a day off, or a couple of days off cycling, because the wrists hurt, which can't be a good thing. But a lot of the people that have these tend to run them at a lot lower pressure. But I just like the fact that it's fast, and I can cycle quite quickly on it. So these I'm quite comfortable at cycling about, say, 19, 20 miles an hour. And they can hold it, and if the wind's behind me, I can do 25 quite happily. As far as, because of the gearing on this particular bike, which is an 8-speed, and it's got a 38 front and a 16 rear on a Alpine 8-speed hub. I think that's equivalent to, top is a 3810, and the bottom is a 3830, I think, and you've got 8 in between. But it does mean that I pedal out at about 31, 32. My feet are going around so fast at that point that I can't really pedal anymore. But unfortunately, one of the problems with that sort of thing is that you don't really have a good top speed or top gear or bottom gear, but the thing that mitigates it is the fact that I wear cleats and SPD pedals, as you can see there, the mounted type, and that basically saves the whole situation as far as power is concerned. It means that all I have to do is adjust my cadence to meet the gearing, which is not optimal, but it's good enough. I'm not doing this for competition, I'm just doing this for fun and exercise. So yeah, I hope that kind of describes the Big Apple or Schwalbe. It's a fantastic tyre, it corners beautifully, it goes off-road, I think, fantastically, although the reviews I've read, people say that it's, it's not particularly good off-road tyre. I'm not an off-roader. I'm not someone who regularly rides a mountain bike in a kind of sort of competitive manner, so I don't really know, but for what I've done, I think it's fantastic. It hasn't let me down on any situation. Having it at fairly high pressure on loose ground, you can feel a slight side to side that you sometimes get when you're going over, say for instance, stones, and they're sort of falling either side, and your tyre's sinking in, but as it sinks in, it goes to one side, or it goes, and you get that sort of general movement. But for some people I suppose it could be considered disconcerting, but to me it's fine, because it doesn't affect the cycling or the balance at all. It's just something that you feel, and you really can feel everything when you've got it pumped up, and the Kevlar guard which you get with this gives me the confidence that I can cycle without it causing problems. But let me see if I've got the Schwalbe. Yeah. So this is the Schwalbe information saying it's got Kevlar guard. That's this particular thing saying it's a 50. That's 50 millimeters, and 559 is the actual bead. So it's this bead, and the 26 is the outside diameter, and the 2-inch really is the 50 that it's talking about in that. So yeah, these go a lot wider, but because I'm running mudguards on this. Oh, that's another thing. The mudguards that I have are almost just as wide as the tyre itself. Because the tyre is slick and it's just a sort of nice curve, you don't need the mudguards wider than the tyre. In fact, you can probably have them narrower than the tyre quite considerably, because the water tends to track up and bend, so it's thrown up at an angle, and this side it's thrown up at that angle, and they kind of like meet, and depending on how fast you go, depends on really how sort of high up it gets thrown before it sort of meets. But if you have the mudguards fairly close, like so, then yeah, you don't have a problem. And similarly, so if they're much narrower, but where you have, say for instance, a knobbly tyre like this, the water tracks up into, say for instance, one of these knobbly bits, and it can't go anywhere, so it gets flicked up at this point. And with this sort of tyre, you must have mudguards minimum the width of the actual tyre itself, otherwise it will flick past it, whilst this won't. So all in all, I really like these tyres, and I thoroughly recommend them.